Hello. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the poetry of Gordon Williams, whom I'm reading out of Native Poetry in Canada. Williams is from the Shuswap and Okanagan peoples, and his poems deal a lot with loss and with memory, with the nature of memory, both in terms of the commemoration or remembrance of loss, and in terms of how the mind works and how the mind processes loss, images, ideas, etc., etc. So the first poem of his that I'm going to read you is called The Last Crackle, and it deals with the role of individual memory as a tool for preserving Indigenous cultures in the face of settler colonialism, and yet at the same time, the limitations of memory as a tool in the face of the overwhelming sociocultural forces of settler colonialism. So this is The Last Crackle. She sat there by the west window, unmindful of the mosquitoes who'd always managed to squeeze through the screen mesh insect barrier. Now it was sunset again, so many days of waiting. A long time ago there were hardly any bearded men, now the forests are full. They've flung bridges across all our rivers and even our lakes. The sky is filled with metal birds that make noise loud as thunder. All our men are dead and our young ones have no ambition. They took it all away, those bearded men with their strange ways. Kneel with us, they said, and pray. Then they took our land and our children. Now they've taken their beards off and shorn their hair, and they smile quick as a rattler's strike. Before you open your door, a face of stone, then before your door is fully open, a smile, trying to sell an old woman beauty cosmetics. Her eyes were closed, she seemed to be asleep. Her drifting took her back 100 years or more to when she was just a little girl throwing pebbles, making ripples on the water's picture of white poplar trees. Her days of waiting were ended, her chair rocking her away and the last rays washing her face, while the chair gave away the last crackle. And so this is, of course, a poem about the memory of an elderly Indigenous woman, remembering a time prior to settler colonialism and the arrival of European or European Canadian settlers. And the problem, of course, that this poem raises is that when memory is the repository of cultural knowledge, it depends on the lifespan of the rememberer, right? So as the subject of this poem, this older woman, implicitly dies at the end of the poem, the memory of what her Indigenous culture was like prior to the advent of colonialism dies with her. And all that remains is the current situation, right? In which all our men are dead and our young ones have no ambition. They took it all away, those bearded men with their strange ways. Kneel with us, they said, and pray. Then they took our land and children, right? Because one of the big problems that face Indigenous Canadian populations today is that there are comparatively few resources available, especially on reservations, and there's comparatively few employment opportunities, artistic opportunities across the board. And so there's a lack in settler colonialism. And that lack did not always exist, right? In the era prior to colonialism, prior to settler colonialism, Indigenous cultures were vibrant and flourishing across the North American continent. And that has been lost. But the memory of that, the memory of what came before the current situation, if it is not somehow transmitted or preserved intact in a meaningful and useful way, apart from individual memory, with its limitations, its flaws, the eventual death of the rememberer, etc., etc., then all that remains in the absence of that is a memory of the present, an understanding of the present and the present condition. And that forecloses opportunities for Indigenous resurgence, for a return to traditional Indigenous cultural structures, political structures, socio-cultural, socioeconomic, etc., ways of existing in the world. The next poem I'm going to talk about is Dark Corners. And this is another one that deals with individual memory and the experience of loss. But this one is a more individual experience, not necessarily the loss of culture necessarily, but the loss that individuals experience, which is, of course, definitely connected to this larger thematic. So, Dark Corners. The hospital where I was born is not there anymore. The town is, I think. People were jovial, winters, summers, summer just a breeze over fields of alfalfa green, grasshoppers red and yellow winged, crackle from place to place. Somewhere in the 40s, as a little boy swatted them, World War years, jammed into tomato cans. War is for grown-ups. War is not for children. Only mature people fight sensible, only children fight senselessly. Blackened sister's eye, if there were one. Years floated by, bird in disguise, woodpecker pecking on rooftops. Sleep was wonderful, and sunlight seeped through a crack in the attic, illuminating a path through dust particles. No light reaches the darkest corners. And so again, this is kind of this. The style is not Dylan Thomas, but it reminds me kind of Dylan Thomas, who writes so much about the experience of childhood and this nostalgia for the ways in which children look at the world through imaginative lenses, imaginative eyes, that very often we lose in adulthood as we are trained into rationalism and responsibility and things like this. Also, as our brains fully develop, I suppose that should be mentioned as well. But yeah, there is this sense of nostalgia and this sense of loss for, in this case, individual childhood experience as opposed to the collective experience that we saw with the last crackle. But the fundamental mechanism is the same, a memory of something lost. The next one I'm going to read you is Justice in Williams Lake, and this is very much more a straightforward critique of settler colonialism and the ways in which settler colonialism undercuts and problematizes ideas of its own values, really, right? Because settler colonial societies like Canada and the US ostensibly value things like justice, the rule of law, the presumption of innocence, and these kinds of things. And yet in our national treatment of Indigenous peoples, peoples of color, etc., that has often fallen very, very short. And so Justice in Williams Lake deals with that issue. Justice in Williams Lake. A cold breath of dawn speaks to the wind, to the flag fluttering across the sky, realizing that neither wind nor flag have ears, only a heart, longing to see justice withers, walking through the gaping mouth of dawn, over the morning's bleeding lips, on last night's snow. First footprints red, angry winds blow through the chambers of frozen minds that won't serve justice. The wind blows colder, and the flags snap angrily. Bells of freedom ring through an idealistic dominion. Publication prints splots of ink, splotted, splattered, blotted, plotted. Democratic rapists set free, fined, forgiven. Indian maiden raped and killed, too young, too dead to smile. Her murderers set free. This is democracy. Mute flags indifferent to lamentation. Manipulation of justice in Williams Lake.